Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I love to use panels. And I have a panel which is a nice big flower, bright, bold flower. Let's take that big panel, cut it in 4, and make a quick quilt. Here's a panel from Timeless Treasure called Radiance. And what's great about this is this huge flower. Now you could just put borders around this and it would be stunning. But they have a pattern that accompanies this that you can cut this up and explode it. It's a free pattern from Timeless Treasures. I'll put a link in the description for you. But the panel has been cut up, borders have been added on, and it gives it this sort of exploded look. And yet you can still see the flower. Press it very well so that you have no wrinkles, it lies nice and flat, and give it a little bit of a starch. And you need to cut it in 4. So you're going to be able to take that and fold it in half and match up the edges the best you can. And it's not going to be exact because you're going to trim off those raw edges afterwards. And give that a light press. Fold it again in half. And this time match up that fold edge. And give that top seam a light press. When you open it up, you're going to be able to see those press lines. And that's where you're going to want to cut it. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it on the shortest side. It's just easier because the ruler fits. I'm going to be able to use that press line as a guide with the edges. But I'm going to center it the best that I can on those center marks. When it's been cut apart, I'm just going to match them together. My most important line to keep straight is this cut edge. And once that cut edge is matched up, you're going to be able to use that press line to cut the center. It's only going to be used as a guide. The most important thing is the straight is going to be on the ruler along this cut edge. And using that center press line, I'm going to take my ruler and move it right up to that press line. Now I'm going to match up this edge. It's more important that this edge is perfectly straight than following that fold, because that fold's just that guide. And once that line is straight, I'm going to be able to cut it right down the center. And I'm not worried yet about all of those other edges, because they're going to be trimmed off after. Once you have them cut, you might have a little fold still in your fabric, so just take it to the iron and make sure they're pressed flat and you don't have any of those folds. Now we're going to be able to take these 4 pieces and trim them all to be the same size. Match up the corners. So I'm going to have 2 pieces sticking up and the 2 pieces going down. Match up those cut edges. The 4 pieces need to be trimmed to be all the same size at 17 inches high and 11.5 inches wide. What you're going to do is cut them off on those 2 other edges because you've already straightened up those 2. So I now have 17 by 11.5 inches. The next will be sewing borders on these, but you're going to sew 2 borders on one side, 2 on the other. So it's easier if you put them together first and then choose the 2 borders that you want. In the directions, you're going to see that they have 2 blocks with the borders sewn on the inside and 2 blocks with the borders sewn on the outside. So you'll need your 2 outside borders and your 2 inside borders. And what I'm going to do to keep straight is I'm going to put pins on the borders that I want to sew on. I'm wanting to sew a border on this edge, this edge, those 2 edges. The next borders I'm going to sew are on that outside. So the border will be up here and here. Now to ease the construction, I'm going to match up all of my pins in the same corner. So I know those 2 edges are the ones that are going to have the border. These are going to have the border. So I'm going to turn it this way. So I know those pins are all together, which means that's the edge the borders are going to get sewn on. There'll be 2 different borders sewn onto those big center blocks. and they're sewn onto those corners that have the pins on. So the first one is going to be the length, which is 17 inches by 1.5 inches. And that's going to get sewn on the side with the pins. I've taken the seams and I've pressed them towards that blue little edge. I've also put them back in order, so I still have those 4 pins in that fabric. By doing this, this is going to keep me organized and I'm not going to sew on the wrong side. The next border will also be 1.5 inches, and this measured 12.5 inches. So I'm going to sew those right onto that other side with the pin. Press that blue out to the side. I do like to keep them in order until I have the last 2 borders on. The next strip is 2 inches by 18 inches, and that is going to go on that very first edge that you put on. Continue pressing going out. The next is 2 inches by 14. I'm going to open it up, sew those 4 centers together. And to match up those pieces, you're going to be able to just look at the petals. I have a green petal here and a green petal here. I have the blue and purple, which means the blue and purple are going to go here. I like to sew the 2 long sides together first, and then I'm going to be able to sew that center seam, matching up that corner. I love the pow factor of this flower. You can still see that it's a flower. However, it gives it a little bit of a modern feel. The next will be sewing a series of borders on. The first border is going to match this border here, so it looks like it's going to be an extension. It is the same 1.5 inches, and it's going to go along each edge. Then we're going to take 1.5 inches and put it on the top and the bottom. With that 1.5 inches border on, the next one is going to be 4 inches. The fabric is duplicating the same fabric that you put on those center pieces. So this border is the same as this big border. So do a 4-inch border all the way around. The next border is going to imitate this little skinny border at 1.5 inches. It's going to go all the way around. However, on the corner this time, we're going to have cornerstones. And what that means is each of these pieces are going to be cut the width and the length of the quilt. So you're going to have 2 pieces, the length, that are going to go on the side, 2 pieces, the width, that are going to go on each end. And the little cornerstones will go right in those corners. When the 2 long borders have been sewn on, you're going to need to sew on the top and the bottom. But before you do that, you're going to add on those cornerstones. And what you're going to do is just sew those squares right on each end. And that way when you go to sew them on, they're going to fit perfectly. So this is how the cornerstone looks when you're done. Both of these borders were the same size as the quilt. That made up the extra in the corner. So it doesn't matter what size you do these pieces. If this was 2 inches and 2 inches, this would just need to be a 2-inch square. If it was 4 or 4, it would be a 4-inch square. The borders need to be the same size as the quilt. That takes up the space. The next border is a nice wide 4.5-inch border. You're going to take your longest measurements and make those borders that size. So they're going to go right along that edge. Once you have those 2 sides on, then you're going to be able to get that measurement from edge to edge. You're going to be able to cut that piece that size and it will fit right along that top. So you're going to have a nice big 4.5-inch border all the way around. The next border is going to duplicate this smaller border. It's just going to be reversed. Where we have the darker blue on the long pieces and the light in the corner, it's just going to be reversed. We have the dark in the cornerstones and the light around the outside. So do the same as you did here. Take your measurements and put the cornerstones on. We have one final border to put on, and that is also going to have a cornerstone, but this time it is a wider border at 3 inches. All of these borders have been very, very simple borders because they're not needing a lot of detail and they're following a pattern. You have a small little border, large, smaller, large, smaller, large. And it continues that. And by doing that, it gives it this step appearance. It keeps it clean. It keeps it not busy. Yet it accomplishes the size that you want and really accents the center panel. So we've taken that panel, cut it in 4, and added some borders on it. Simple borders, and they all repeat. And it looks beautiful. It's simple and it's quick. So this quilt equals 53.5 inches by 64.5 inches. That's a nice size. It was quick and easy. I do hope you give it a try. I'll put a link in the description to the pattern, and as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.